But nonetheless, I think I can say on behalf of both of us that it's been a great privilege to serve South Africa in this capacity as Minister and Deputy Minister. And what Yolisa should have said is that on her right sits the former Minister of Finance and the former Deputy Minister of Finance, because we've got to get that protocol right as well. And we must thank President Zuma for this opportunity to serve South Africa, in my case, 2009 to 2014, and then being called, then Deputy Minister coming in 2014 until now, and then in my case being asked to pay him a visit on the 13th of December at about 7 p.m. in 2015, on which occasion he said that he would like me to take this job. And I often have to remind people that I didn't apply for this job. You know, most of you apply for your jobs. I didn't apply for this job. I was asked as part of national service to take this job. And for the first time, I also want to say to you what I said when I was asked to take this job. I said that, why me? I was in fact enjoying getting the Back to Basics campaign going in Kokta and working with municipalities, and it's been a passion for a long time, in fact for both of us, to actually work on that terrain. And I mentioned two names as possibilities that the President could consider, Mr. Jonas and Mr. Jabu Moleketi. And he said, no, you are the man they say can calm the markets. So I said I need to consult my family, which I dutifully did. I didn't want to be in trouble at home and at work at the same time. And the family reluctantly agreed, because it was my intention after the local government elections to in fact retire. Of course, that went out of the window, and we find ourselves in the present circumstances as we do. So, why was it necessary to deploy me in this capacity? It was necessary because of the blunders made on an occasion called 9/12 these days. In 2015, when a good, hard-working person was also occupying this chair, Mr. Nene, was told that he no longer needed to occupy this chair. And when we were concerned about the markets, as many people were, whether you were a business person or a pensioner or a public servant or just an ordinary South African, you were concerned about the fact that the rand certainly and suddenly went from 1430, I'm told, in December 2015 to 1540 on the 12th of December. That's virtually overnight. That the bond yield climbed from 8.5% to 10.5%, and currently, over the last 24 hours or less, the bond yield has moved from 8.3 to 8.9%. That means that both as government and as South Africans, we are paying extra to actually borrow money. We were hoping, for example, today to raise 600 million rands in the bond market on a short-term basis, and bids for just over 200 million rands were actually offered, because there's this concern about the economy arising from the announcements made yesterday. Similarly, you're all familiar with the stock exchange and with debt service costs going up as a result of the dynamics in the market. Now, that doesn't give us any pleasure, because as the finance family, our responsibility is to offer as much stability to the country as possible and do whatever we can, as we've been doing very dutifully for some time now as the Treasury family, to reassure whether it's markets or ratings agencies or investors or business people, and most importantly, ordinary South Africans, that their financial future is safe in the hands of this government. And I'm sure that the 1,000 plus professionals, some of whom are sitting around you as the media, are committed today, as they will be committed tomorrow, to make sure that they do their utmost best to continue a very proud tradition of managing and maintaining macroeconomic stability in South Africa. It's this macroeconomic stability in the form of our fiscal policy and monetary policy, and that's not the Treasury's policies, it's the government's policies, that has offered the kind of background that's necessary for growth to take place, even if it's a minimal growth that we have at this point in time. It certainly enabled us to recover from the recession and make a contribution in the near future to higher levels of growth as well. There are two things that events of last night bring to the fore. The first was the whole question of this mysterious text here. I got it in very big font, but you're not going to be able to read it. But this is the so-called intelligence report. This is the so-called intelligence report which said that, amongst others, the two of us and the Director General are involved in this massive conspiracy to undermine the economy of this country. And if you read this, this is absolute nonsense. This is not the basis upon which you fire, inverted commas, or release from their responsibilities, which is a more polite way, by the way, ladies and gentlemen, of saying it, a Minister of Finance and a Deputy Minister of Finance. So yes, we all had it, and it's circulating quite widely in the country at the moment. The second reason given is that when we were on this very ordinary routine roadshow that happens every year after the budget and after the medium-term budget policy statement, where we meet in particular bond investors in large numbers in order to share with them first our latest budget figures, which they know already, secondly, be there on a face-to-face basis to explain to them any detail that they want explained to them, or any number that they would like explained to them. And thirdly, watch it. There is some tradition in the Treasury of chairs collapsing, so be careful. And deputy ministers in particular need to be careful. And officials and where ministers or deputy ministers join these roadshows, we meet ratings agencies as well. So, some of us, including the Director General, left on Sunday night. Some officials, maybe one or two, left on a night earlier. We had two business people as part of the delegation. The head of BLSA, President, and the chairperson of BUSA, Mr. Jabu Mabuza, and the CEO of the Johannesburg Stock Exchange, Ms. Nikki Newton-King. The trade unionists were a bit delayed because of visas, and they would have joined the Deputy Minister and the team when they got to the US in Boston and New York. And I have one complaint for the media, if you don't mind. Normally you complain, but can I complain this time? You kept repeating that the Deputy Minister must come back when he was here all along. Some of your radio stations went on and on and on to the point of reaching nauseating heights. The Deputy Minister and the Minister have been asked to come back, but the Deputy Minister is in South Africa. He was only meant to leave on Tuesday night to go on to the US leg. I was meant to leave the UK on Tuesday night to come back to South Africa. And the Director General and the Deputy Minister and the business and labor people would have dealt with and met the various people that they needed to meet in Boston and in New York. When the plane lands at Heathrow Airport at about 6 a.m. on Monday morning, We put the phone on, I do, and then I see this message which says, come back immediately. And cancel the roadshow. Okay, but we were not going to be able to come back immediately because the flights are only, as you know, in the evening. And in order to ensure that there's no wasteful expenditure, because you'll see posters with the PFMA around here, we continued with the program for Monday, and the first two meetings, and there's a reason for telling you all this, which you'll understand in a moment, were with Moody's Ratings Agency, and the second one was with Fitch. The third rating agency, Standard & Poor, was going to be met with on Tuesday morning, but because by Tuesday morning we were expected to be back here, we arranged that we have a teleconference with them. One of them was in the US, one in the UK, and one in South Africa. I think the South African gentleman flew over to London for this meeting, but we had a teleconference with them. So we interacted with all three ratings agencies, as we've been doing over the past years, and in particular last year, as a joint business, labor, and government team, to ensure that we continue with the kind of achievement we had for the country last year, which is to keep this country's economy as an investment-grade economy, and to ensure that the borrowing costs, whether it is for government or for the private sector, and therefore ordinary South Africans as well, who want to buy a car or buy a house or borrow from a bank, however big or small that loan might be, that those costs are reasonable costs and don't shoot out of the roof. We then met probably between 50 and 60 individual investors who, if you put all of them together, I don't know, they probably control $1 trillion, $1.5 trillion. $5 trillion, no, correction. $5 trillion. The Director General is very passionate about this thing. So he asked me to communicate to you that it's US dollars, not Zimbabwean dollars. Now, that's a lot of money, $5 trillion. And if they're willing to lend it to South African government agencies, state-owned companies, the sovereign itself, and the private sector in South Africa at a reasonable cost because we are investment grade, it's for all our advantage. And our job as Treasury, while we occupy these seats, and of course we no longer do, is to ensure that we get the best possible deal for this country. But there's an allegation circulating around that sickens me. And that allegation is that I had secret meetings, or a secret meeting, with somebody or bodies. And the intention was to undermine this government. Now, people like both of us, and there are many others like us, so we don't claim any special privilege, have from a very young age been activists in the struggle. Why on earth we would want to undermine this country now, I don't think anybody can reasonably and logically explain, except maybe this permanent analyst in a particular station. You know those, right? Because they come up with the strangest stuff, manufactured especially in Mars. So let me say emphatically and categorically that there was no such meeting. Now, if anybody wants us not to do this job, just tell us not to do this job. Nothing has to be manufactured in order to create an environment in which our integrity needs to be undermined and we need to be discredited in order to justify some objective outside of the real intent. So, where do we go from here? As far as the Treasury is concerned, the Revenue Service, the Financial Intelligence Center, the PIC, and many others are key institutions which are vital to our democracy and vital to our economy. And all of us must make sure as South Africans that they have both the right political leadership, but they also have the right administrative leadership, that they perform their mandate and their responsibilities with the utmost commitment to the Constitution, but more importantly to the national interest. And that's what we've been trying to do in the time we've held this office, and we believe we have not compromised our integrity in that regard at all. And one hopes that as we move to the next stage where Mr. Gigaba takes over, and I've just had a word with him and congratulated him on his appointment, and informed him that he might find us in this space. You know, we've got to do some packing of boxes, and he understood. And we offered to meet with him on Monday by agreement, so that we could take him through the key issues that he has to deal with once he takes responsibility as Minister of Finance with his deputy. So whatever has happened doesn't mean that we will not be professional in the way we conduct ourselves, and will ensure that there's maximum stability and continuity in the kind of issues that the Treasury actually has to deal with. But what both of us will be very adamant about is that the institutions that fell under the Ministry of Finance are institutions that must constantly be reminded, if they forget, that they are here to serve the South African public and no narrow interest. And in that regard, both yourselves that are here, whether you're the media or staff, and I don't know whether this is being streamed live, but if it is, South Africans who are watching and South Africans who will hear about this, will commend the Deputy Minister for his stance earlier last year in saying that he was offered a bag of cash. Now, if you do commend him, you can clap. That was to keep you awake too. And him too. So the one thing we must emphasize is that our souls are not for sale. They're not for sale. We've got our own brown bags, but they're for carrying clothes and things like that. We don't need anybody's brown bag. And we hope that more and more South Africans will make it absolutely clear that our country is not for sale. So let me conclude by saying that over the last 15, 16 months, we've been subjected to the most horrific attacks on the work that we do, on the budgeting process, which is a collective government process. There's no such thing as the Treasury decided to do X. The Treasury doesn't decide on its own. The Treasury could make recommendations. The budgeting process goes through a technical process, which is chaired by our DG, but it's called the Medium-Term Expenditure Committee of several DGs from several departments. We have a ministers' committee on the budget that has 10 ministers who are part of it, including the deputy minister as well. And ultimately, decisions are made in cabinet. And what I present as the Minister of Finance, or any other Minister of Finance will present before me or after me, are matters that have been agreed by cabinet. So those narratives about somebody being too big for his boots and so on is a regrettable narrative. None of us seeks any glory for ourselves, unlike some people. And we don't intend to do that in the future either. So we hope that both ourselves and our families can now lead normal lives. For now, until we decide otherwise, we remain members of Parliament and will do whatever we are asked to do by our organization. And we must appeal that the Treasury and the 1,000-odd professionals that work for the Treasury, led by a Director General who has immense integrity, over 20 years of service as a public servant, and there are many others who also have 20 and 22 and 23 years of service to this country and have made an immense contribution and very valuable contribution to making economic policies or contributing to them in a way in which constantly their intention is to advance the best interests of South Africans and the South African economy as well. So I'm going to ask the Deputy Minister if he'd like to add a few words, then we'll take a maximum of 10 questions. I'm sure you want to hear his voice, don't you?
Well, thank you very much. I think this is a very important time for South Africa and for South Africans in general, because I think some of the things and events that are happening in the country are probably contrary to what we envisage to be the dream of the new South Africa. And all of us as South Africans should wake up and smell the coffee. Because I think...
or anything else you like to smell. That's legal.
Because I think you've got a lot of cases in history where countries make a swift turn and never return. And we must actually ensure that, and we're saying this to all South Africans, that all of us have an interest of ensuring that our country remains stable, that our economy grows, that inequality is addressed, that jobs are created. That's what all of us should be looking for. And when things tend to be ugly and bad, institutions are weakened, development suffers almost permanently in some countries. So we are probably at crossroads as South Africa. And probably this we must not take lightly. And I'm sitting here probably, and the minister is sitting here, not because we feel personally aggrieved, but I think we think that there are very big lessons that we need to take as a country. And I'm not here to teach you those lessons. Thank you.
Yeah, we want to emphasize the last point that the former Deputy Minister made.
Sounds better when you say ex-Deputy Minister.
Ex-Deputy Minister. Which is, we're not here to complain about anything. We're grown-ups. We understand that you don't have these titles for your entire lifetime, and that there are periods when you're required or requested to serve. We've done our service, and we move on to new chapters in our lives. We don't feel any sense of entitlement, so let's make it absolutely clear. Okay, so we're going to handle it, ask Yorisa to manage your requests.
Thank you, Mr. We'll take the first round, 5 questions. 1, the person, your name and your middle house. Thank you.
With me?
Yes. It's you, Aramila there. Okay. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Go ahead.
Good afternoon, Minister, Deputy Minister Barry, or should I say former ministers, Barry Bateman, Eyewitness News. This morning, SG Gordhan made a comment when asked about this list that was put to the top 6 regarding the reshuffle. And he said he's not comfortable with this particular list. And he made the point by saying that it appears that this list was drafted outside and it was given to us to legitimize. Now, it appears he's saying, or he's not saying, what everybody suspects. So my question to you is, what is he not saying? Because we know what he's saying. So my
Minister,
question
please,
is,
remind.
so my question is, who is he referring to? Where was this list drafted? And why is the top 6 then just accepting that they're simply legitimizing this list for the president? Thank you.
Good morning, ministers, ex-ministers. Sorry, Gordhan from MoneyWeb. I want to know if President Zuma is not in the public interest, what would your counsel be to the public and elected officials what they should do now, what they should do next?
Musatana from ENCA. My question is actually for the Director General.
He had to unfortunately leave for another meeting, but ask your question. We'll find a way of answering it.
Okay, it was really, I suppose it was more directed to him because you had a very close relationship going forward, and I wanted to see how he views his future in the Treasury. Your leaving is on some level you're talking about a defense of the Constitution. So does he feel vulnerable at this point? What is he at all considering his future?
Journalists who are next to mics, please press the mics around you. There's one gentleman.
It's Devil from City Press. When you return to South Africa on Tuesday, sorry, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. And reportedly visited the 2 hours before appearing in Pretoria and visiting the court afterwards. What precisely were you told at the 2 hours? Were you confronted with this alleged intelligence report at that point, and precisely why were you there?
Are you saying that we were confronted with this intelligence report?
I'm asking.
You didn't ask initially. So as they say in court, reformulate your question. Go ahead.
Okay. You were at the 2 hours on Tuesday morning. Why were you there? Was it to be confronted with this alleged intelligence report?
Arabi Dedanjay, that will be the rest for the first one.
Considering the events then of the past couple of hours, are you getting a sense that there are more people who will be willing to follow you out the door, not just at National Treasury, but as well with regards to the rest of Cabinet? Sorry, I'm at Good News.
I'm Rajini Bansami from the Daily Maverick. Minister and Deputy Minister, I think you're still in your positions until somebody else is sworn in, so I'll address you in that way. You know very well what's at stake. You know what your ambit of responsibilities are as Minister and Deputy Minister. What is the urgency for removing you? What is the reason for your removal? What is this grab about? What do South Africans need to look for as that's going to unfold in the next coming days and weeks as the grab of the National Treasury takes hold? Thank you.
Over to you.
No, we have a very proud democratic tradition here. So we don't mind consulting with each other in your presence. But don't misread it, eh?
Can I just say the following? Because I think many of the questions seem to be driving to a particular point. I can see. If you look at the events in South Africa in the last couple of years, should I say, I think there are certain patterns that you have seen, events that point to particular interests being protected, being consolidated, being deepened. And I think probably the state of capture report, which I don't know, it's called state of capture, state capture report, is probably the pinnacle of that point, where it probably consolidates a picture of a state that is increasingly, or institutions that are increasingly becoming vulnerable. Institutions that are increasingly being centers for attack, in many instances to be blunt, for looting, actually. So that's a reality that we have. You don't need to be a genius to see the trend in the country. And so it's important. I'm not going to interpret for you what this means, what the agency is, as Ranjani is asking. What I'm telling you is that you have in front of you history unfolding. And at the center of that history that is unfolding is a democracy in a sense, and a democracy in a sense, an economy in a sense, being undermined by all sorts of things. And some of those are actually diversion of state resources to serve particular interests. Now, the story of our state-owned enterprises is a known story. So you just need to read public documents called annual reports. You also need to read a couple of other statements that show you. So I think South Africans you have a responsibility to keep on making the point of connecting these dots to say, what is the political moment in the country? And if we're not doing that, I can tell you now, by the time I think the disaster hits the country, we'll actually be accused of having lived with our eyes wide shut, when actually political decay is deepening. I'm not answering the question, but I'm saying that's the context, by the way. And some of the questions you're asking about what is it, agency and so on and so on, I would say find the answer within the context I'm painting. And I can be more frank than on these issues, but I think we have a challenge. It's a national challenge. And it's not about Pravin, Gordhan, it's not about Jonas, it's not about some of the people that, clearly there is something that as a country we need to be worried about. And I'm not going, I think that if you really go back to the State of Capture report and a whole range of other documents and the Denton report, the whole range of these reports circulating, what picture are they painting? What are they saying about where we're going? I'm not going to tell you what, but I think that gives you a context to understand some of the questions you're raising about agency. The report is nonsensical, I mean, to be frank. I mean, whether you read it from whatever angle you read it, even if you consider language of it, by the way, it's like it's written by amateurs. Even if you consider the logic of it, it's fundamentally so flawed. South Africa is an open economy. So how do you not mobilize investors outside of the country to ensure that they invest in the economy? An open economy, how can it be killed by two individuals, by the way? If you're saying you are destroying individuals. I would say you read also the text. There are families that are mentioned in the report, which Treasury seeks to undermine. Since when have families become, I mean, families are important, but it seems that increasingly we have those that are becoming a national agenda. So I'm saying that's the reading that you must make, not us.
Bottom line is that we don't want to spoil your reading pleasure. But let me reinforce the point the Deputy Minister is making, and that is that connect the dots. Don't look at individual dots. And even if the State of Capture report is 1/3 true, that should be concerning us. You don't have to prove every single thing. Why is Denel going to court against the Treasury? Why is Denel insistent upon VR Laser and Denel Asia and so on? In what circumstance do you get the chairperson of the board of an SOC attacking a minister of government publicly? Why is that chairperson allowed to continue to do so? Why isn't that person called to account in a democratic, open South Africa and told to behave? They are heads of other institutions, one in particular that you would be familiar with that I might be referring to, right? No other head of institution talks about or to the political head that he is responsible to in the manner that he does and get away with it. So, why undermine legitimate authority is a question that all South Africans should ask themselves. And we're not raising this because it's a parochial issue. As my good comrade here has pointed out, these are serious national issues. And when, if you don't mind me saying so with great respect, when the media only chases sound bites and doesn't paint a complete picture, right, and doesn't represent the facts in sufficient detail so that ordinary South Africans are empowered with both the facts and sufficiently rounded knowledge, which enables them to ask the question, are these guys representing our interests? Or are they doing their own thing? A democracy can only work if citizens are informed. A democracy can only work if those citizens get the opportunity to question us and ask us to explain ourselves, not get away with all the things that we want to get away with. And that's a dream that many generations of freedom fighters have sacrificed a lot of their lives for, and literally so as well. So coming to the first question, Barry, and I must commend you, it was morning, by the way, when you were speaking, commend you on the accuracy of some of your reporting. I was listening to how you tried to communicate the complex matters in court, and you did extremely well, if I may say so. What the SG has in mind is for the SG to explain, right? But I think he's set sufficient, a sufficient amount in the public domain to indicate to us that as a member of the top 6 of the ANC, he's not entirely happy, and that he doesn't feel empowered enough in those circumstances to have had the opportunity and the ability to influence a key set of decisions. And I'm sure that within the structures of the ANC, these are matters that must be taken up and dealt with, but it's not for me to actually comment on that process. Safe to say that if indeed decisions are being made elsewhere, which determines the future of institutions, which impact on the future of our country, then we should all be very afraid.
In any case, Minister, you should also probably take the point a little bit further. The fact that you have parallelism politically and in terms of authority, it's not ahistorical. It happens in many societies when increasingly you see decision-making taken outside of the formal structure. When in fact structures, when democracy just becomes a formality, actually the decisions get taken elsewhere and get transported to legitimize into formal structures. I'm not saying that's the reality, read for yourself, but that's probably the biggest danger, because it then questions the very fundamentals of democracy. Sorry, Minister.
No, that's fine. That's your job, is to add to what I say.
I'm sure you see why we should celebrate our firing.
So, Warren, your question is in a sense answered by this as well, but to now add to the point that my colleague has made, you know, South Africa has a very rich history of community mobilizing and mass mobilization, which in different periods during our history served us extremely well, from the Alexandra bus boycott in the 1950s, the potato boycott of farmers in Mpumalanga that Ruth first exposed, to the period in which we grew up in the 70s and 80s politically, and where millions of people were actually involved through structures, whether it's trade unions, women's organizations, youth organizations, civic organizations, and so on. So what should the public do? Organize. Organize. Because fragmented voices don't have the weight that is required. It's organized voices. And that's I'm not saying that as an individual. I'm a trained political activist who received his training, just like my colleague did, in the ANC. So what I'm saying is ANC policy, if you like. It's the ANC ethic of being accountable to the masses and getting the masses involved, not on the basis of false narratives, but on the basis of legitimate knowledge and information that empowers them to be agents of change and empowers them to change their own conditions and their own lives. We also received our training in the Communist Party, by the way, where we say, the masses make history, not individuals. Individuals matter, yes, very important. But it's only when the masses get involved, and we have proof of that in South Africa as well. Sorry about the lesson in politics. Kate, the question of the future of the senior officials, as I said earlier on, they are all highly committed South Africans and public servants, and treat them with respect their professional knowledge, debate with them in a mature and respectful way, and create an environment where open policy discussions can happen. And I'm sure they'll be willing to serve another 10 years for this institution and for South Africa. But each of them will make up their own minds about how they deal with these questions. But for now, they are here. Devalt, sorry, I had to ask you to reformulate your question. We visited the SG because upon landing, we were intrigued by this recall from London, and we thought we could make an important contribution, as I outlined earlier on. So between the Director General and myself, we said, hey, let's phone the SG, find out what's going on. So we were not confronted with anything, just for the record. We had a 20-minute conversation, reported to him about our trip and what we were attempting to do, and also reassured him that Mr. Jonas is in South Africa, much to his surprise. And yeah, I mean, nothing happened there that had any relationship to what happened last night. That's for the record, but he can comment on his discussion. Arabile, do we expect more people to follow us out of the door? Well, we're not walking out of the door voluntarily. And that's a decision that each person must make in their own right, depending on how they feel about the current environment. And Ranjani, your question was, I think, answered more than adequately a moment ago. So, the next 5.
1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. That's it. Last. Go ahead, ma'am. Can you go get closer to the mic?
There's one here, if you want to use that. We're just testing how flexible you are, you see, and how agile you are.
Okay. It's Catherine from the Times newspaper and website. This is a blunt question. Is the Public Investment Corporation funds, the trillions of ordinary South Africans' retirement funds, are they safe now? Because the Deputy Finance Minister has the last say of the PRC, and is it going to be okay now?
Paul Carlson from the TVC News, Minister and Deputy Minister. I'm wondering if you think President Zuma is still fit to be president. Do you think that he is corrupt or merely being manipulated by people who are corrupt?
Good morning, Minister. It's Anton May from Pretoria. I want to add to that question. If you have to vote on a motion of no confidence in President Jacob Zuma now, what would you vote?
Police, can we allow the press conference? And then following your participation in the meetings with the ratings agencies, do you think that your hard work has been undone following your removal? Do we see another ratings downgrade? Thank you.
Following up on that, Peter Grant with NPR. You said you're still a member of Parliament. You plan on staying there for a period. How will you vote on the no confidence vote? Will the ANC get 50 defections?
But he just asked that question.
Well,
You wasted your opportunity. You wasted your opportunity.
How will you vote on the no confidence vote?
Hi, Ministers. Speak from Jacaranda FM News. I just wanted to know from you guys.
Where are you? Where? Oh, okay, sorry.
Okay, sorry. I wanted to know, will you be resigning as MPs? What do you think the future holds for the ANC come 2019? And do you believe the Guptas have captured Zuma? Good afternoon, Ministers. Just adding on to one of those questions. So as you know, the Moody's rating is next week, and a lot of financial heavyweights like Fitch and Anglo-American and PineBridge all said that your axing would be very devastating to South Africa. So what would you think the next step is to try and get us out of the dog box of the investment community?
Good day, Minister. Samuel Skiti from the Sunday Times. You spoke about court cases earlier, Minister. I just want to revisit one of those court cases. The matter in which you were an applicant, asking the court for a declarator in the exercise of public power between the relationship of the client and the bank. How important is the outcome of that matter to you? Now that what has happened yesterday, is it still as important as it was when you were minister? And then DM, perhaps flowing from your reaction to this intelligence report.
Intelligent or intelligence?
Intelligence. And all of these other sort of attacks that have taken place against the Treasury. Do you believe that there's a family in South Africa that is a national keyword?
John?
Minister John Bailey from ENCA. Bartelsman lost their urgent court application this morning to buy a big bank, and you've been accused by them of dragging your feet in this process. So we can get your comment on that. And then the other question would be, who sent you the comeback SMS?
It's very mixed. So with Finwe, a lot of the people I know today are really in despair. Do you really think that it's possible to halt or reverse the trend that we've seen over the past 2 years, which I think has already been communicated and voiced by much of the media? Last.
Good afternoon, Ministers.
Something wrong with somebody's arithmetic about 10, eh?
I wanted to ask, just behind.
Oh, okay.
I wanted to ask, has firstly the President given you the decency to call you and talk to you about the decision? And second of all, what has your relationship been with the President since you've come into the position of Finance Minister? Do you communicate with him, and have you interacted with him on a regular basis regarding all the trips that you do and how your department is run? Thank you.
Okay, over to the Minister.
Is ANN 7 here? So we're going to give them a special slot for a question. Because they have a lot to say with so-called independent analysts. So, and they have a lot to say when they want to attack us and malign us and try to disgrace us. So where's ANN 7? Any question? Be fair. No, this is very fair. This is very fair. Would you like to be the subject of daily and nightly attacks? This is very fair. All we're saying, there shouldn't be any booing, so I agree with that. All I'm saying is that, you see, why must we constantly deal with people who are never seen in the public domain? Never. But they mastermind all these attacks on family, make false accusations, pay somebody called Bell Pottinger. You know them? Eh? PR firms are hired, millions of rands are spent. To do what? To do what? To malign democratic institutions of South Africa. But why don't they come out face to face? Let's have a debate face to face. Anyway, let me get back to the questions. You see, that's fair. That's fair. Because you can't, have fake news and fake Twitter accounts and all of that stuff attacking family members who have nothing to do with the Treasury. You want to attack the two of us? Go ahead. Go ahead. Why you attack family members? Would all of you, whether you're in the media or anywhere else, like that to happen? That's not fair play. Play fair. And be open and be transparent. We are an open democracy in South Africa. We've got nothing to hide. But of course, I'm sure we'll hear a mouthful pretty soon. PIC funds, are they safe? Let's just set the record straight. Firstly, the PIC funds, a PIC is what you call an asset manager. It invests funds on behalf of the Government Employees Pension Fund. The Government Employees Pension Fund has a board, that's 50% employees and 50%, let's call it government appointed. But in terms of the legislation that the GEPF, that's what it's known, is operating by, government is the final guarantor. So if there's any actuarial problem, any, let's call it shortage of funds, it's the fiscus that must ultimately pay and make that pension fund good. It's very important for South Africans to know that, in particular the 1.3 million civil servants and others to know that as well. That at the end of the day, if there's any so-called mischief in the GEPF or the PIC, it's the fiscus that must stand as guarantor and foot the bill if there's any shortage of funds in that regard. And that's why, as the Treasury has to keep a careful eye on what's going on there. Secondly, it is not written anywhere in law that the Deputy Minister chairs the board of the PIC. Had I stayed in this job a little bit longer, we were both agreed that we need to get an independent chairperson for the board of the PIC, like any board anywhere in the commercial world, so that there's no political influence in the way the PIC is run. And that's a recommendation I'll make to Minister Gigaba as well, that perhaps he wants to consider that as we go forward. So the team that we have at the PIC is an extremely professional and competent team. The Deputy Minister has worked a lot more closely with them, so if he wants to comment a little later, he's quite welcome to do so. The President and the questions that were asked about that, I don't think it's for me to comment on right now. That should be addressed to the right quarter. There are 2 or 3 questions on the motion of no confidence. I think I'll be guided by my conscience when and if that actually happens, and hopefully do the right thing, whatever that might be. So you can come back here in a short while and ask me the question again. Have the work we've done with the ratings agencies been undone? No, I don't think so. And I don't think any South African would want the good record that we've established with labor and the business sector and the kind of confidence that we've tried to generate over the last 18 months or so post 9/12 must be undone in any way. Because any undoing of that confidence, any decline in the rating status of the country is going to hurt ordinary South Africans. And ordinary South Africans shouldn't pay the price for any nonsense created elsewhere. So all of us actually should work towards ensuring that the ratings remains within the investment grade side, so that all South Africans can be rest assured that the best is being done for them, and certainly the Treasury staff are very committed to that. What's the future for the ANC in 2019? Well, I think a lot of ANC senior people will be concerned that the trend that was observed in the local government elections is a trend that needs to be reversed, is a trend that should not indicate decline any further. And because the ANC is still, I believe, an organization that has, by and large, the interests of all South Africans at heart and is based on very sound principles, it is the organization, if it can get its act right, that should continue to lead the democratic government that we have in South Africa. But it will, and there are many who say this, including many senior people, trust in a political party is earned. You don't have it by right. You do the right things, you earn the trust. If you do the wrong things, you lose trust. And certainly there are many who would want to make sure that the kind of trust that the ANC has had for a very long period of time, over 100 years, is something that we can regain in order that 2019 goes the ANC's way. But hard work needs to be done to actually achieve that. The Guptas and their influence on the President, again, that's for you to judge, it's not for us to comment. In a kind of wider context that the Deputy Minister was actually indicating. And I mean, if there are any questions about the President, please direct them to the Presidency, because that's the best place to have them answered. Moody's next week and out of the dog box. I don't think we're quite in the dog box. I think there are a lot of good things that are happening in South Africa. The Rand until yesterday was still the best performing currency amongst emerging markets. The growth dynamic in emerging markets is very positive. There are sort of green shoots that can be seen in the global economy. And that was a conversation when we attended the G20 meeting recently. But it's up to us as South Africans and the different constituencies that we're trying to bring together to inspire confidence in our economy, firstly. Secondly, demonstrate that we're capable of bringing about some of the reforms, for example, good governance in SOCs. And thirdly, convince people that the so-called political noise in South Africa is normal political noise in any society, and the kind of political competition that we're going to see within the ANC is competition that you see in any political party as well. But we must be able to tell the story in a convincing way, so people believe that we are heading in the right direction and that the trajectory that we are pursuing is correct. I believe we have a very strong case to remain investment grade unless we shoot ourselves in the foot. And I hope that the question of the Deputy Minister, so he'll come back to that in a moment. How important is the Oak Bay court case? I think it's important to have, on issues like the ones that the court was considering, clarity, so that we have a firm policy basis, in this case decided by a court of law, so that we don't have any haggling like this for the future. I don't have to worry about, whether a bank is interfering or not, and we'll see what happens as far as the judgment is concerned. But that clarity, I think, is quite crucial. Dragging of feet in respect of Habib. Well, what I want to do is take you for a walk and show you I don't drag my feet. Okay, I might even beat you when walking. So, there's no dragging of feet, but there are processes to be followed. Banks are important institutions, and sometimes we forget the simple facts of life about a bank. A bank collects deposits from customers, and it lends out that money that it collects in the form of deposits. And when you want to go and get your cash from a bank that you've actually deposited, the bank must be able to give you back that cash. At the same time, the shareholders of the bank will want to make sure that it makes a certain amount of legitimate profit. So there's three things here. It's the person that you lend money to who must have the ability to pay back. It's the shareholder who must be able to extract a percentage of profit. And it's the depositor who must get a certain amount of interest on the one hand, but also have the assurance that the money is going to be repaid if and when that money is actually required. Secondly, I think 2008 and 9 taught us some very important lessons about banks. That if banks do not have substantial shareholders, and by substantial I mean shareholders who can put in the cash to make sure that the bank has the right kind of liquidity and capital that needs to be held, then banks can find themselves in trouble, like Lehman Brothers did, or Bear Stearns did, and many, or even RBS, the Royal Bank of Scotland, which is owned by the British government today. It is still, after all this time, hasn't worked its way out of the difficulties that it fell into at that particular point in time. So the banking regulator has to ensure that these questions are answered, and they're answered with the appropriate level of information, and that there's a level of comfort with the answers and the proof that is actually provided. Now, the banking regulator has reached a certain point in their decision-making process, and my successor will then have to apply his mind to this issue when he enters the doors of this place. The comeback SMS. The comeback SMS came from the presidency. Despair and can be reversed. Look, countries are all over the world will get into modes where they have one kind of difficulty or the other. South Africans, I think, are optimistic by nature, and I'm sure that we will work our way out of this. The key is let's work together to make South Africa a better place for all of us. The relationship between don't get distracted, because this is the last two statements we're going to make now and then close up. And thanks to the colleagues behind me for joining us. The relationship between ourselves and myself and the President, I know the President from 1974. That's when the President and about 10 others were released from Robben Island. And we were amongst the young activists who worked with the President at the time. And when he's got relaxed and has the time, he'll share with you the manner in which we helped him and many other ex-Robben Islanders, and helped him to leave the country as well in 1976. Secondly, we've had no tension between us, as far as I'm concerned. And as far as the matters related to the budget are concerned, there's always been very constructive engagements between himself, and not just myself, but the Treasury team broadly as well. So I hope to visit him soon and have a cup of tea and have a chat about the world and the various things that we might have a mutual interest in. Deputy Minister, there was that one question for you, and anything else you want to add?
Sabelo, I think that read what's happening and answer yourself. I think the signs are all there. I mean, and, again, I mean, we might want to avoid it. The reality is that we are at a crossroads as a country. That's the point I was making. And some of the issues that we are talking about are linked to that fact. I think I must thank you. Should I take that? Usurp that power.
Yeah, please do.
Ministers of Finance and two vulnerable.
You know, coup d'etats are dangerous, but please go ahead.
Thank you very much for participating in this press briefing. We thought it's important that we just explain some of the factors that were not clear in different media houses. Some of them are deliberately distorted. we thought it's important that we put across our views and positions on a number of issues that the Minister has outlined. Thank you very much for participating.
Straight from the press briefing held by the outgoing Finance Minister and his Deputy Finance Minister Mcebisi Jonas alongside Gordhan when outlining the reasons of his recalling by President Jacob Zuma. All stating, just to mention a few, the intelligence report that Gordhan and Mcebisi were involved in, and also making mention of the road investors show